Sunset of Seniors. In the summer before senior year, Captain Stockton died. Tigrid took the news quietly, but his eyes showed true grief, one that reminded Rupert of the day so long before that Tigrid had collapsed and wept in the playground near their new house. He wanted to fly alone to the funeral, and he was unusually quiet for about 2 weeks after he returned, but he slowly resumed his normal routine. His parents weren't sure if he ever got over it or what he felt. All they knew was that he never mentioned Captain Stockton again unless asked. When Mrs. Stockton died, he only sent a condolence card. His abilities with AI and the remote control planes were getting ever more remarkable. Now that he had a driver's license, he would disappear to go test his prototypes, and every few weeks, he would bring his parents out to a field to show off some new nuance in their capabilities. His friendships were much like those of middle school. They were cordial and productive, but they weren't very heartfelt as far as they could see. Senior spring, he seemed to be slightly unfriendly to his friends. As expected, he got into MIT, which didn't seem to affect him. He was pleased, but mostly in the sense of having one less thing to worry about. Surprisingly to them, he took Brienne to the prom. Because she was still left, as he put it. It would be mean for her to be left out. His parents were not so sure that was the only reason, or if it was a reason at all. She wasn't plain or ugly or fat. In fact, Annabelle thought she was very pretty, and there was no way to tell when he had asked her. He put no effort into things like senior prank day, however, declaring most of the goodbye rituals, including buying the yearbook, stupid. Empty nest. After a lot of conversations, Rupert and Annabelle finally decided what they thought it was. Tigrid was closing the books on high school. There was no reason to maintain any old friendships, so there was no reason to be nice. His friends, such as they were, would disappear into the ether. They called Dr. Tombrock, who said that Tigrid was probably going to miss his friends, but that it was typical for boys to find fault with them when a relationship is going to end. It makes it easier to say goodbye. The Schauts accepted this, but they weren't sure. They weren't sure about anything anymore. What had seemed so stable and optimistic a couple of years before now felt dark and ominous, and not knowing why compounded the effect. At home, conversations with him wound closer and closer to his grievances over stupid rules, self-serving restrictions, and, of course, insurance companies. In these conversations, he was both as energetic and as unaffected as a dying fish, if panic can be separated from passion. They had a pleasant day dropping him off at MIT, but saying goodbye felt more like bidding a work colleague farewell. Annabelle wept every night for weeks because of it. I wasn't affectionate enough, Rupert. That's the problem. Rupert didn't know how to answer that. He consoled her. She had been a very affectionate mother, reminding her of all the time she had spent with him when he needed her. But he, too, felt somewhat snubbed. He couldn't sleep well either. They didn't call Dr. Tombrock. They went to McDonald's the day after dropping him off and thought about him as a little boy. The last thing they wanted to hear was good advice. After that, Tigrid was rarely seen at the house. He was from that point forward only an occasional visitor. After graduating, he found a job in a high-powered tech company and went on to found a company of his own, then another, and another. The main one was called AI Works and was the only one they understood. He never had time to visit outside the most necessary obligations, and while his parents could no longer understand anything he talked about from his work, they could see that it was making him happy, the way Tigrid could be happy, and that he felt he was doing something important. Also, they could see it was making him a lot of money. They knew that for sure when they read about him in the paper. sometimes in connection with a company they had never even heard about before, because he never mentioned it. In one, Tigrid had talked about his philosophy. "We are here to change the world," he said, "incrementally." The audience laughed. "We have big things in mind, but we don't do moonshots. We do things right, and I can promise you that we never take anything as good enough. We never say it is what it is." Good companies. Eventually, Tigrid paid off their mortgage and found a trust that allowed them to stay in a selection of houses in places like Tahoe and Stad, and to use a private jet at will. Somehow, he got his pilot's license and bought his own decommissioned F-16, though he never learned how to fly a jet himself. He found an ex-Air Force pilot to do it, however, and his parents took a very few slow and easy flights on it, too. "It still felt like a roller coaster," Rupert said, "in an earthquake." His business dealings had had him cross paths with an aging Elon Musk in various capacities, and they looked at each other as friendly rivals. They collaborated in a very low-key way on self-driving technology, which had stubbornly remained a difficult beast to master, with Tigrid meeting with Elon's engineers on many occasions to trade ideas. Elon's side would have lawyers in tow. "Not because we don't trust you," they said, "but just as insurance, if you know what I mean." Tigrid's main company, AI Works, specialized in self-flying vehicles, and it was his technology that finally retired Air Force fighter pilots for good. The only ones left would be there only as long as the last fighters, and the successor to the F-35 would be the last. His prediction had been close. However, Tigrid improved even on self-flying vehicles. He developed a thought transmitter to control the AI. A human pilot could control it from the ground in conjunction with the AI solely through thoughts. The result was an amazingly stable and quick platform, unencumbered by the human meatbags that some still called pilots. It took advantage of the best of machine dexterity and human intelligence. Further, he matched human control planes with a fleet of wingman drones of various sizes. Each plane flew like a fleet, and the pilot could deploy entire swarms of drones on missions, the details of which they would complete alone, much the same way one thinks about moving an arm. Thousands of muscular adjustments take place as if automatically. And for the future, Tigrid planned to upload pilots' brains to the planes. This would reduce hacking and would release the real pilot from the mental exhaustion of a real person faced when opening his thoughts without rest. And it would allow the pilot's mind and the AI to communicate so closely that they would be, essentially, one entity. Thought transmitters. The transmitter looked like a necklace, but to communicate, it had to be worn over the head. Tigrid knew that implants would be a hard sell. Elon's implants had been successful, but there had been horror stories of infections and brain damage as a result of the human-machine interface. Tigrid developed them much further, but he kept it for himself and a select few who found the risks acceptable. He wanted to do more testing before releasing it to the mass market. It could communicate pseudo-telepathically with anyone with a similar device. Tigrid was able to communicate directly with his most trusted inner circle through thoughts alone, unattached to any other device. It was not easy. Mental discipline was needed to wall off one's inner monologue and random thoughts. But once he had mastered that, communicating with another person reminded him of his weeks at MIT camp. It felt like an ongoing daydream, taken out of time. Words, with their measured pace along a timeline, have no sense of duration when they are pure thoughts. It was like talking at 1,000 times the pace of normal speech, and required frequent breaks. His head would ring after such a conversation, and after a few hours of it, he would also have to sleep heavily and long. Gradually, his mind built stamina, and his powers of concentration got stronger than he could have imagined. He wondered if it was anything like the way animals thought, and direct communication with animals was put into testing. He had already proven that intelligence did not require language, so the limits of intelligence would be able to be explored directly. "We'll find out if Gary Larson was right," he said in an interview. "Do dogs really just say, hey, hey, hey?" His parents reluctantly took one each of the external devices and used them occasionally, though never with each other. Tigrid could alert them, much like making a phone ring. If they weren't wearing them, they would flash, vibrate, or make a sound just like a cell phone. If his parents were wearing them, they could get an unobtrusive but slightly distracting feeling, something Rupert referred to as a whisper. They normally chose to transmit in words rather than raw thoughts, always afraid of letting out some strange thought when their minds wandered. They felt too old to adjust to that unfamiliar and uncanny mental discipline. One other thing came to Tigrid's wealth. He took care of all his parents' bills. He even canceled their insurance. "If it makes you feel better, Mom and Dad, we are self-insured. I can pay for anything." Whenever he saw them, he reminded them of it. "It's not like you freed us from wheelchairs," his mother said. "That's a good idea," he returned. "A good idea. Maybe I could cure you of smallpox, too." Rupert and Annabel debated whether that was meant as a joke or not. Tigrid did not often tell jokes. Was it a message of some kind? They concluded that it was probably a failed joke. His attempts at humor had always been hit or miss. But the comment put them in the same ambiguous place that they always found themselves in. This was something they had talked over with Dr. Tombrock. That feeling had existed as far back as they could remember to some degree. They decided to laugh about it. "What's crazy for normal people is just eccentricity for the rich," said Rupert. "But he's not the rich," said Annabel. "He's our son." Rupert sighed. "We're not finished yet. A biography of one such as Tigrid Schaut would now weigh his achievements, his failures, his virtues, and his faults as if they tipped on a seesaw. It would chronicle his ups and downs in wealth and sanity as he moved toward retirement and death, as if they were ladders and slides. And it would put his strength of character against the whirling vicissitudes of life, as if these reflections were a merry-go-round. It would speak of his parents' death and what they thought of him at their ends. It would speak of Brienne and their children. And it would show whether he was happy and worthy or sad and wretched once the ale of life had been drunk. But these things are not important. Just as George Washington's portrait is incomplete but captures his essence, only one more episode will be enough to impart the story of Tigrid Schaut. Joining the pantheon of Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, and Elon Musk would have been too unremarkable for him, just as being in company with Howard Hughes or Nikola Tesla would have been too pathetic. No, Tigrid had his own plan. The complex. In his penthouse office in Schaut Tower, which stood at a polite distance from Trump Tower, subtly downplaying the fact that it was slightly taller, Tigrid gazed for one last time at the city, and he considered his plan. It had worked so well. His parents had really believed that he wanted to be a fighter pilot. Any young boy would want that, and it was partially true. More importantly, it made his interest in flying machines natural, and his work on AI drones the more plausible. His increasingly acceptable personality, with a few curated faults, produced diagnoses from Dr. Tombrock that suited Tigrid well. His withdrawn behavior at school and high achievement kept his teachers just at arm's distance, and his equanimity but capability for revenge kept his friends respectful. Only Captain Stockton had guessed that Tigrid had something more in mind, and he never questioned it because it had been his own advice to keep his true goals a secret. As a businessman, Tigrid needed loyal followers, and he had acquired the skills to get them. He needed allies and others of his own ilk to compete with. And along with his private army of eager scientists, Elon had provided that. Tigrid had copied many of his strategies in forming not just companies but cabals, and he learned, notably with his own Twitter account, how to get the public to worship him, if not as intensely as the Musk bots. He needed lots of money, and he had achieved that. His companies were a baffling conglomeration. His critics often said it lacked focus, but he had created them to act as his own breakaway economy. That was why his holdings in mining, lumber, fracking, shipping, and many others were so diverse and so blandly and even poorly named. Arizona Holdings was almost completely a merchant marine company. Finally, he needed an underground complex, and he achieved this by buying land around an old salt mine. It needed to be vast, something that could remain self-sufficient for years and need minimal trade with the outside world in perpetuity. That required massive stores of food and other supplies, large areas to grow crops and livestock, access to water, ways to purify sewage, ways to vent heat without letting in outside elements, and robots to maintain it all. It also had to be able to produce clean air when sealed completely from the outside. It would need a nuclear reactor, and it would need methods of self-defense. While Elon planned as his elusive Mars colony, Tigrid planned a real Earth colony, and it would not need a mission of settlers. While Elon planned his elusive Mars colony, Tigrid planned a real Earth colony, and it would not need a mission of settlers. He built it out of the Arizona desert, near to the, by then almost disused Area 51, and he built 100 more around the world. Since the others wouldn't need to support life, they were much smaller. It fit into the desert landscape as if it weren't there, but for one structure. A great geodesic dome 200 feet high. It was possible to climb it, if you were careful, and he had done so many times, all the way to the top, where he could see the horizons and where the hot wind tried to buffet him off. Staring through the wall-high window of his office, Tigrid imagined he could see the dome all the way from New York. He opened his thoughts and did see. He saw drones swarming the sky, vehicles coming and going, and his blue-clad people working inside the complex. They were making final preparations. The dome gleamed in the sunny and crisp December air. Turning decisively, he summoned his helicopter. The day of reckoning. The Arizona sun was in full blaze as Tigrid began to climb the dome. He did not need to rest as he clambered higher and higher, but he stopped now and then to admire the scenery and view his workers as they bustled back and forth, glancing up occasionally to see his progress. With his brain implant, Tigrid thought a message. "All of you may go home. I wish to be alone. Evacuate the complex and seal it, but for the front gate." He closed his mind to them. The employees immediately executed his orders, and it was only minutes before all were getting aboard self-driving buses and leaving the outer gate. Nestled in the side of a rocky outcropping, a massive metal door stood open, a long line of lights leading into a tunnel that receded out of sight. He continued climbing. He was wearing a long trench coat. Dangerous, he knew. There was no safety net, but he knew he wouldn't fall. He reached the top and stood, staring in the distance and burning into his mind the feeling of being in the wide open space. He thought a message to his parents. Today you will see my dream. I take my leave of you. Wait patiently. You will be protected. Goodbye." He knew they would not hear him right away, and he closed his mind to them. Their necklaces would flash until, having finished their coffee or come in from the garden, they would notice them flashing and put them around their heads. Aside from the wind, there was only silence. Wisps of dust rose up in the distance as the buses disappeared. He addressed his mind to the main AI. Release the drones. The cement covers of 36 silos slid to the side, and thousands upon thousands of drones swarmed out, none bigger than a fist. Tigrid thought about his other locations, and there, too, the drones were deployed. In England, Italy, Russia, China, India, Africa, everywhere. They zoomed off toward the cities. He could follow them all on thought clouds that the drones transmitted. They were integrated into multiple visions that Tigrid could navigate from one to another in his mind. His own drones disappeared quickly. He would not witness their actual explosions. But in Phoenix and 1,000 other cities, he could see them through the thought cloud. They each carried an explosive payload and were able to squirrel into the ideal locations to destroy their targets. They brought down entire buildings, one after another, after another. He sensed his father had put his necklace on his head and opened his mind to him. "What are you doing, Tigrid? Please stop." "You will see what's happening. Everything you need will be protected." Tigrid then slowed down his speech to just one word at a time. "All that will go are the insurance companies?" said Rupert with some panic. "Yes, father." Tigrid shut his thoughts off and reveled in the sight of every insurance building, office, and server getting blown to pieces. People panicked and fled. Convinced there would be nuclear explosions next, they packed the roadways and went to basements. But the bombs never came. The attack stopped, and the people looked at all the burning and collapsing buildings. They were all around, dotting the cities with plumes of smoke. But the cities were not destroyed. Most of the buildings remained intact. The people looked at the familiar sights: bridges, supermarkets, parks, schools, playgrounds, restaurants. Everything was there. Everything except the insurance companies. Tigrid sensed his father urgently trying to reach him. He opened his mind. "Tigrid, you must stop," thought Rupert. It has stopped. "What about the DMV and IRS and all the other places you complain about?" "That's a good idea," Tigrid thought, smiling and pushing his smile through to his father's thoughts. "Oh, that's not what I mean, Tigrid. I don't think you've thought this through." "Oh, I have. They'll be taken care of by the AI. You see, there are viruses ripping through them as we speak. They can't be stopped. Even if they are destroyed, the viruses can regrow again and again until they have succeeded." There was a pause. "Tigrid, all these things will reassert themselves. You can't just blow them up. This will not usher in a new freedom." New freedom, thought Tigrid. It's so much more than that. They will feel the pain. Annabelle broke in. "Tiggy, please stop. Please. We'll take you to McDonald's. Just like when you were a boy." Rupert thought, "These are not ghosts, Tigrid." Tigrid did not respond, and suddenly his parents lost control of their thoughts. His whole childhood came rushing into his mind from their point of view. Their thoughts were hopelessly mixed up together, but he saw all their worries, all their nights awake, all their joys when he seemed to be better, all their regrets for having done something wrong. They were trying to send the words, "Stop, Tiggy," but they were drowned in the thoughts they couldn't control. Tigrid closed his mind to them again. He swayed on top of the dome, dizzy, wishing he could lie down. His brain seemed about to explode. He knelt and put his hand on one of the bars for balance. He took several deep breaths. Then he gave a thought command, and the long rope unfurled to the ground. Grasping it with his hands and legs, he slid down. He had brought specially designed asbestos gloves for the purpose, and his pants were made the same way because of the heat that would be generated in a 20-story drop. When he hit the ground, he walked to the great door. Everything was quiet except for a soft wind. It felt odd but invigorating to be alone as he entered the massive building. The doors started to close behind him. He smiled, and his muscles relaxed. He opened his mind once more, this time to send to anyone with a connection to him, but not to receive from them. And he set his thought to repeat. Free, he thought. We are all free. He heard the main doors close with a clang, then the second layer of doors, then the third. Finally, I am free.